Finish that first jazz poster. Now let's make another one and try some different methods for manipulating images. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to change the guides on this page. Now, not the bleed. The bleed is always the same. That red line outside the page is always the bleed. But this line, the margin, is pretty close to the edge, and this layout has got a lot more white space, doesn't bleed off the edge. So the way we can change the guides that structure the layout is under Layout, Margins and columns. Now you'd think that you would go to create guides, and that is useful if you're creating like a grid, but we just want to create some columns. So put it on preview. I want to change my margins to 0.5. That's a much more generous margin. And I also want to change the columns. I want a 3-column layout within those margins. So I'm going to go over here to columns, and I'll just set up 3 columns. Now, the other thing I control is the gutter space, the space in between those columns. So I want that to be maybe just one more click. So remember that number, 0.1875. And this is what's really awesome about InDesign is the way you can structure, divide a page up and allow for spacing. So the other thing I want to do is I'm going to create some boxes, but first I want to create a guide at about 8.25. And you can just drop it anywhere there and then go up here and actually put the dimension in, 8.25. So I'm going to build some more boxes using the rectangle frame tool. I pretty much ignore the rectangle tool. It's exactly the same. I don't know why they keep it on the toolbox still. So rectangle frame tool, and I'm going to go right to the guide, and I'm going to bring these about halfway down. Now in this case, I don't really need to use step and repeat because I have guides that tell me where to go. So I'm just going to hold down the Option key to repeat it, the Shift key to keep it in line, and it'll snap right to there. And then I'll do the same again. Hold down the Option key to duplicate it, Shift key to keep it in line, and bring it right there. Perfect. Now I want to take and repeat those. So I just grab all 3 and I do the same thing. Option key to repeat, or Alt, and then the Shift key to keep it in line. And I'm going to bring those right to that guide that I made. So now I have these 6 boxes, and what I want to do is change the arrangement based on these shapes. So this box I'm going to bring down. This box I'm going to bring up. And do you notice how it's keeping track of the spacing in between all these? If that's not already on, you should put that on. Under Grids and Guides, check on Smart Guides. Smart Guides are what help you with the spacing. So this one again we're bringing up. Now watch, when I bring this box up, it's going to tell me when it's aligned with the first box. Perfect. We're always trying to keep things well spaced, consistent, and aligned. Now I've got all the shapes right where I want them, sized and placed. So to fill them with images, I'll just go to Place. These are my 6 images. I'll just drag a marquee across all of them and say Open. And that way, all of those images are loaded in my cursor, and I can just click on these boxes, and it drops them right in there. Perfect. Now we have the images. Let's go ahead and put the type in there. So we have 2 boxes for this type. One box goes across all these 3 columns. It's at the very bottom where the margin is. And for that, we're going to put in all the text. And the first thing we want to do is we want to make this into a 3-column box. And the first thing you might think is, well, I'll just make 3 boxes and I'll repeat this. And you want to, InDesign is set up to manage these text boxes and put spacing and whatever you need. So it's much better to have the least amount of boxes possible. So in this case, we can go to Object, Text Frame Options, and make this text box a 3-column text box. Do you see how it's lining up? But it's not quite lined up, and the reason is because our gutter is not the same. So remember I said remember that gutter number, 0.1875? Now you can see it lines up perfectly. So the columns that are behind this are just guides. They won't divide a text box or an image box. So we need to divide it within the text frame options. Okay, so let's take out this bit of type, NYU School of Music, and put that in its own box up here. Now, if we scroll this box at the bottom down, it should line up to 3 pretty even columns. And we can force the break right there by saying type, insert break character, column break. That makes sure that it breaks just like we want. Now we just need to set the type up. And what we want to do for this is I want to make it all caps. And remember I said the best way to do that is not to type things in all caps because then you don't have any options, but to just choose the all caps. And I'm going to make this a little bit smaller because it's all caps and sans serif. And I'm going to make this Brandon Grotesque. And we'll make this medium. Okay, perfect. Now I just want to line it to the bottom right there. And I think the spacing is pretty good. I could put a little bit more. Let me bring it up a little bit. So let's put a little bit more leading in this. 10/16. Okay, looks good. Now this box, we're going to be treating that differently, and that's why we put it in its own box. The type at the top, NYU School of Music Presents, we're going to borrow the same type that we used at the bottom. And remember we did that on the other poster where we dragged the actual type box. But here it's not in its own type box, so we can't just drag it. But we can copy the specs of this type by using an eyedropper. So this type has got to be highlighted, which is what puts it into the type instead of the container, we're modifying the type. And then I'm just going to touch it on that type. And now it's the exact specs of this type below. And then I want the word synthesis to be all caps. And I really just want that to go as large as it can. And I'm going to have to make the type container larger or it's going to disappear before I can size it. So synthesis, I just want to do that Shift Command greater than, get it as large as possible. I can use, take up the spacing between the letters a little bit here with the tracking. And I'm going to bring this, I want to bring this as close to the edge as I possibly can. Now to affect the spacing, again, leading controls the space above the type. So I'm just going to knock this up until I like the leading. I'm going to match the spacing between these words here. Okay, looks great. And then I'm just going to set that here. And now all I've got to do is do the coloring for this poster. So the first thing I need to do is come up with a color scheme, an overall color scheme. So when I need that, I always go to Adobe Color. So there's a couple ways I could find this color scheme. One is I could extract a color theme from a photo. So since this is a nighttime jazz, I could find a photo that has the blues that I like, maybe some purples. Like here's kind of some purpley colors. I could use that one. Or I could use something like this. So if I wanted all these variations of blues and grays, I'm just going to take a screenshot. And I'm going to go here, and I'm going to put in this image and let Adobe figure out a color scheme of blues. So I'm going to just tweak it. I want a little bit more contrast. I want some real darks and lights because that'll work better with what we're doing. So if I want that color scheme, I just say save. Another way I could do it is I could go to Explore, and I could just look around until I find something that's kind of cool. And I'm looking for something that has a lot of color and contrast. So I could go with something like this. This one looks pretty cool. So I just say Add to Library. Now I'm going to go back to my InDesign file and let's open those CC libraries. And there's those color schemes. There's the blue one I made from the photo. And there's that Northern Lights that I made, the second one. So all I have to do, I want to get those into swatches. So I just right click or hit control click and say add theme to swatches. So now I have my colors. So what you can do is we can actually tint these images in our poster. So one of the problems I see is all of these are black and white except for this piano photo. So we need to change that piano photo to also be a black and white. And the best way to do that is to go to your links panel and you see all your images are linked. And we're going to go to Edit with Photoshop. That keeps the file linked but opens it up automatically in Photoshop so you don't even have to find the file. It opens it up and then we're going to change that and make it into a grayscale. And I'm going to save it. Now, when I go back, as long as you save it as the same name, same file, there it is sitting there in black and white, all taken care of for me. I could leave all these images black and white. I think they look pretty good. Or we could tint them. So let me show you how that works. It's actually pretty easy. So we'll go to the Properties panel. All of these can be tinted. Let's get that swatches panel out here. There is a container and then there's the photo. So you can actually make the container and the photo two different colors and it creates a really interesting effect. But it only works on black and white images. So let's see what we have here. This, because of this boundary line, that is the photo. This is the container. So I'm going to make the container light green. And then I'm going to click to the photo. I'm going to make the photo dark blue. And I can do that to all of these. So this one, I'm going to make the container this color and the image. Oh, see, it won't let me do it. That means that one's not a grayscale. All we got to do is go. When we look on our links panel, you can see this guy is an RGB file. So that you cannot tint images in InDesign unless they're grayscale. So I'm just going to go edit with Photoshop. And I'm going to turn that into a grayscale. Mode, grayscale. And I'm going to say save. And that's it. Now the replaced photo will be the grayscale. So now I can make the container into one color and the image into another. Okay, so that's how you make it. You just have to think of it. Remember, it's the container and the image. And when they're different colors, it can create a really interesting effect. This one essentially is a negative because we made the container dark and the photo light. So if we made the container lighter and the photo dark, it would go back to being a positive. If we make the photo light and the container dark, it's a negative. Okay, so it's a really interesting effect. And then now all we got to do is go into this type and use our color scheme. So all this type at the bottom, I can make this real cool blue. And then I think what I'll do is make that type blue also. But the word synthesis, I'm going to go with this kind of electric green. Poster number 2, all done.